For the most part, I really loved the literature, reading the original poetry and learning enough of the language to do that.
But I think for a diverse community like Harrisonburg, that was a very great move to bring people. I think it was at different schools, and they would sit and talk and decide what they think the money should do, and then go over a survey and evaluation, say this is what got the most interest and let's do it.
And I chose to major in Russian because I had been really proficient in languages. I studied Spanish in high school and won the state awards, but I didn't want to keep going with that. I wanted to try something new and different, and Russian was what I landed on.
How did your experience going to a top school like Harvard shaped your interest in civic engagement, in civic participation? Welcome to Road Talk on this other episode, the Harrisonburg Series, where we are talking with Harrisonburg community members who have been doing a lot of amazing work in the community. We've had an episode previously with the Mayor of Harrisonburg, Mayor Dina Reed, and today we're talking to Vice-Mayor Laura Dent. This will be a very interesting and epic video to watch because we'll discuss more of her background, experience, and her upbringing it into civic participation or civic leadership or public service. And so stay tuned as we are having a great conversation today. And so Vice-Mayor Dent is a passionate advocate, but also someone that is very interested in inclusivity and making Harrisonburg a vibrant place to be. Born in Jacksonville, Florida, grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. She went to Harvard School, so we have a lot of things to unpack today and learn about her journey and her experience. So welcome to our Road Talk show today, Vice-Mayor Dent.
Thank you, Rodrigo.
I hope you're having a good day. On Road Talk, we really, really value conversations that we have with people that are ready to offer their stories to our viewers and the Harrisonburg community and the global community that watch Road Talk. And so the first thing that I want to ask you is around yourself. What can you say about yourself? How did you grow up? I talked about you being born in Jacksonville and going to Harvard, which we'll be talking about very soon. But how did you grow up? What was your childhood like?
Well, I grew up mostly in Montgomery, Alabama, as you mentioned, and I had two siblings. Three of us were raised by single mother because my father was a Navy test pilot who was killed in a plane crash. So before women were single mothers in general, I learned early on an example of a very independent woman, my mother working and raising us. So that was an important part of my upbringing, as well as just the cultural differences. I knew early on that Alabama was not for me because there was so much that was so backward about it. So then I was always one of the smartest kids in the class because my mother also encouraged us to read from early on. So I made the leap to go to Harvard, which is known as one of the top universities in the world.
Yeah.
And that was a real culture shock coming from, it felt like small town Alabama to a global and highly intellectual community. And it was wonderful to feel in a way like I was finally among my peers. And at the same time, there was so much pressure to perform and to learn in the academic excellence. And I chose to major in Russian because I had been, really proficient in languages. I studied Spanish in high school and won the state awards, but I didn't want to keep going with that. I wanted to try something new and different, and Russian was what I landed on. For the most part, I really loved the literature, reading the original poetry and learning enough of the language to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I played sometimes with the idea of going into international relations, but I found that wasn't for me. One of the best classes I took at Harvard was also one of the hardest. I nearly flunked it. It was called Coping with International Conflict. It was taught by Roger Fisher, who went on to write from the material we were learning, the book Getting to Yes. And we had a real-time case study of the hostage crisis in Iran. And I remember him telling us they have no incentive to give up the hostages because that's their bargaining chip.
Okay.
So seeing that unfold in real time, and my fellow students who were already planning to be high levels officials or diplomats, I think I'll go back to the poetry. But still, I had that instilled in me, that passion to make a difference is what has motivated me all along. So that is what has over time reemerged in my civic discipline now. I spent many decades as a technical writer in the computer software industry and learned precision of language and how to explain things clearly and concisely and with visuals. And that's been an important skill to bring here too. So that's me in a nutshell. Not that I fit necessarily in a nutshell. Does that help?
Yeah, that's amazing. And so you going Harvard, which is a big highlight because I grew up in Congo, where Harvard is a name that we've known growing up as probably the toppest university or one of the top universities in the world, and Stanford and things like that. But I've never met someone that said, and I have a friend that went to Harvard as well, but like, in my mind, that was the biggest thing. And I know many young people would dream to go to Harvard because of the history of Harvard and most of the top people in the world. Some of them, even if they didn't graduate from Harvard, at least they went to Harvard for a year or two. And so how was that like? And how did your experience going to a top school like Harvard shaped your interest in civic engagement, in civic participation?
Well, I did graduate from there, to be clear. I was on what we informally called the 5-year plan. After the first 2 years, it was just such a pressure cooker. I needed a year off. And that was the case with many of my roommates. And I realized at that time that several of my roommates and friends were going to Greece to study art history, or Belize to do archaeology, or fine art school in Boston. And I went back to Alabama to work as a cocktail waitress. And I thought, there's a clear distinction of I'm coming from a humble background and am among people who have far more privilege than I ever even thought about. So I thought, I'd better get back to Harvard, finish up there and see where that takes me in the future. And sure enough, my first job as a technical writer, I got from one of my Harvard friends who was working at a software company, and that fit, and I just took from there.
Wow. And that's amazing. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I just think I had always thought of myself as a writer from early on, when I could read in kindergarten, and I saw the technical writing career as a way to make a living as a writer, which otherwise is very challenging. So that, plus the fascination with the technology and seeing the technology evolve. I mean, I started off with VT100 terminals that were attached to a mainframe, and with the blinking cursor and the square type, all the way to working on smartphones. It's just been amazing, the technology explosion. I remember when the internet happened, and that was such an epiphany, because I realized that that's what computers are for, to connect people.
Yeah.
And sure enough, that has become a global phenomenon where people can connect all over the world.
Yeah. And so, speaking of your experience as a technical writer, and of course you've taught at JMU, James Madison University, JMU, as a professor with students writing, technically writing. I'm curious because I don't know what exactly that means, but also, how do you think that helped translate into the work that you're doing today as a Vice-Mayor of Harrisonburg and as someone else in the government, here, and translating community service, community needs, and trying to understand how writing better policies or better but resolutions make sense to people. And how does that help even translate that information to the local community? Because that's another challenge. And so given we have a lot of people here that do not even speak English. So I feel like many technical words could be complicated for many people that are not familiar with that. How do you navigate that dynamic?
Okay, well, first to back up a little bit about what technical writing is. It's kind of an adjunct, to use that word, to computer software development, where the developers might be writing the code to make the software work. We technical writers would be working on, first of all, the manuals back when they were printed, written manuals and then PDFs. And second, the online help systems. And to me, more crucially, the user interface text. Anytime you see a word on a screen, somebody put it there. And when I came to Harrisonburg, it was to work at Rosetta Stone, which was my dream job, combining the languages that I'd studied and loved and the technical writing and in the most beautiful place.
Yeah.
So what I came to specialize in at Rosetta Stone was the writing and what they call localization, which is a combination of translation and making the software and the interface and the help systems work in another language. So while I was not a translator, you're always translating into a native language. I would take the files from the translators and make it work, make the words fit. German words would get long, we have to adjust and so on. So that aspect of the multilingual community was very much there in that work at Rosetta Stone. Now, to bring it up to date with your question of how does it affect now, what I'm doing now? Well, the most prominent example is what we just went through, crafting the resolution demanding a ceasefire in Gaza and Israel.
Yeah.
And I walked through first my colleague, Monica Robinson, and then explained to the public how, the process that I brought from my technical writing classes that I taught at JMU, the process for how to craft a document. First question is, who is your audience?
Yeah.
Second question what is the purpose of this document? And as I explained again in public, the primary or ostensible audience of that resolution was the federal government, the purpose to request certain actions, namely a ceasefire, humanitarian aid, release of hostages. So once you have those bullets down, you know what you're doing. The really important part for us to keep in mind, though, was who is our secondary audience and purpose?
Yeah.
And that would be the community. And our real purpose in doing this at all was for the healing of the community, because we could see that our community was hurting. So to that, with that as a guideline, our purpose is healing the community. We very carefully chose the language to be unifying and not divisive. For example, in the public meeting about it, I explained, we didn't say we condemn Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, because that in itself is divisive to different kinds of prejudice for different people.
Yeah.
Instead, what the great phrase I loved coming up with was, we value the harmony that exists in our diverse community, because that's really who we are. Yeah. And it's calling attention to the positive. So those matters of nuance and tone are really critical in a hot topic like that, as well as just, these are the 3 things we're asking for. How are we asking this? How are we presenting it? How can we be healing towards the community? Mm-hmm. And the feedback that I've gotten was it was a great success. For example, the Jewish community that had objected to the original resolution that we were presented by some of the activists, when they saw this, they withdrew their objections. They couldn't quite get to a unanimous support of it, but at least they were very gratified that we had taken the whole community into account and stopped all the blaming and divisiveness and focused instead on the healing.
Yeah, so having people like you on the city council is important because you have that wealth of experience and also technical knowledge in terms of writing, because your job is to pass this resolution and write them and craft them and so that they make sense. So we're grateful to have you on the council. But also, speaking of the conflict in Gaza, and I've noticed in that city council meeting, there were people from Congo in the audience, and there were Congolese flags raised in here, and that is there's a conflict ongoing in the Congo for 3 decades already, and millions of people. The statistics are talking about 6 million people died from that conflict, and so Harrisonburg has a large community of immigrants, of refugees that come from the Congo, with at least 1,000 people in the city right now that are originally from the Congo, that have been living here, they've raised their kids here, and they've come here either as refugees or other different types of visa. Did you, in the resolution somewhere, or do you think, if it was not the case at that point, do you think that it's important to also raise the issues of Congo?
Not in this resolution. We wanted to keep it very specific to this particular conflict because there were specific demands we were making of the federal government and the negotiations that are already underway. So we knew that the timing was critical.
Yeah.
This is a moving target. People are dying every day. That's not to dismiss the issues of the Congo. I would hesitate to wade into that because some of the people around us were saying, this is really not our job to take a stance on international relations.
Yeah.
What we were responding to was the hurting in our community.
Yeah.
Now, I hear that the Congolese community is hurting too. Does that mean we do a Congolese resolution? And then where does it stop? So I'm really a bit hesitant to walk down that path because this was such a huge issue and really a difficult task to get through. And ultimately, our jurisdiction is local.
Yeah.
We have the city manager and all of city staff that does the day-to-day work of keeping the city going, keeping the streets paved and the trash picked up, and we have to vote yearly on the budget to make sure all that happens.
Yeah.
Now, where we are different is that we are the policy makers.
Yeah.
So when we choose to make a policy statement on behalf of our community, we request our government to take these actions on behalf. So the on behalf is key because we as city council didn't elect our federal officials.
Yeah.
You as citizens who vote did.
Yeah.
So that's why it was that on behalf of was very important to put in there. Now, we city council demand this, our community demands this, so we're passing this message to the federal government as best we can. Now, I do believe in the power of that, that we are speaking as a locally elected body on behalf of our community who can also talk directly to their federal representatives.
Yeah, and I think there could be some confusion sometimes in people's minds about the different levels of government, like the federal, the state, the local government, and which structure does what. And so part of what we do with Church Hall Service and refugee leaders, part of what we do with Church Hall Service is that we train refugee and immigrant leaders in the state, but also even at national level on government structures, 101 and 201. And some of them is just explaining the structures of the government, the job of the state and local governments, the job of the federal government, and how they're somewhat similar but distinct in terms of the reach of the power and decisions that they make. And so that helps because some people might not know that, let's say, the city council here cannot talk to a foreign president about a war or talk to a foreign minister unless they come here and they want to visit the city and there's something, So we train people about that, and that's part of what Church Hall Service Leadership Development Program does. And I know you've been involved in a lot of the things that we do, including the World Refugee Day celebrations. You've read one of the proclamations, and I think that's 2022, 23.
That sounds right, yeah.
2023.
A couple of years ago.
Yeah. And so, and how is your experience just, even navigating, this relationship with organizations that help people that are immigrants or refugees in our community, and how does that feel as a city council member of a great and diverse community, and how does it feel to be here and be involved, at least connected with different communities?
Well, first of all, I loved the invitation to speak at the World Refugee Day. The most important thing I learned there was the difference between refugees and immigrants.
Mhm.
Basically, I mean, I'm sure there are legal definitions, but
Yeah.
refugees had to leave.
Yeah.
Immigrants chose to leave, even if they were choosing to leave a bad situation.
Yeah.
And the refugees have the protected status that they can't be deported back to where they came from and seeking asylum and other legalities like that. So I heard some really gripping stories from members of the refugee communities from all over the world, from Iraq, from Congo, from Eritrea, wherever. It's astounding the breadth of diversity of immigrants and refugees that Harrisonburg has. Now, what that does for being on city council is, of course, we have to hear and respond to the diverse communities' concerns, such as the way we did with the ceasefire resolution.
Mhm.
Now, that was an extraordinary circumstance where we're stepping up to have a statement to the federal government about international law. That's like 3 or 4 jurisdictions removed from running the city.
Yeah.
But again, we're doing that on behalf of our community. Now, another thing I remember saying at that World Refugee Day was relaying that we are on the ground of certain Native, Indigenous American tribes.
Yeah.
And if you're not from one of these 3 tribes, you're an immigrant.
Yeah.
From some generations back.
Yeah.
But, we're all living on borrowed land in that sense. So that was a good way of, for me at least, confirming that solidarity of we're all from somewhere else, however we got here.
Yeah.
So I like emphasizing that community and commonality that we all share here. Now, to touch on what you said about the local, state, and government and federal government levels, I talked about the time when we spoke to the national and federal government on behalf of our community for the international relations. There are also times when we interact with the state government.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most pressing times I remember in my tenure so far, 3 years and counting on city council, was when we had a request from the Middle River Jail to expand the jail for $40 million.
Wow.
And we were saying, no, thank you. We don't want to do that. Community doesn't want that. We don't want to increase incarceration. What are the alternatives? And what I wound up crafting in collaboration with at the time I was on the Community Criminal Justice Board with the county representatives, we crafted a request to our state legislators to get the state responsible inmates out of our local jail, because that was what was causing the overcrowding in our jails. It was causing them to ask for an expansion of the jail.
Yeah.
Now, part of the factor was that was during the pandemic, so they didn't want to be moving people around.
Yeah.
But once the pandemic was done and once they moved moved the state prisoners to state prisons instead of our local regional jail, that resolved the crowding. So we didn't need a $40 million expansion. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So that was a case of pushing up to the state government what shouldn't be our responsibility.
Yeah.
So there's those kinds of back and forths of that. But
and that's good because it's a good illustration of those differences. But also, that money could do a lot more things. That
I know, really, $0 million, I can think of much better things to do than build a jail.
Could build welcoming centers, things like that, and other services to those that are in needs in our community. And so,
it was also the time when we were restarting, along those times, restarting the building of the second high school that was $100 million worth.
Wow.
So I'd much rather build a school than a jail.
Yeah. It's better to educate people,
right? Exactly.
Than
give them a start in life.
Yeah. And I think in France they call jails like a re-education center or facilities where you go be re-educated to come back to the community. So education is probably key. I keep saying in most of my videos that I think there's food and education.
Mm.
It's very important because sometimes, especially the way we grew up, if you don't have enough to eat, you end up going on the street and not going to school because you have to fetch food
Oh,
and
wow.
can't provide.
And
So-
the lack of nutrition, especially
Yeah.
early on, can hurt the children's development.
Yeah.
And I would add to that, housing is crucial. And we in City Council have chosen to use a big chunk of our American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funds, that was a follow-up to the pandemic that the Biden administration provided large chunks of funds directly to the localities, which was such a blessing because we knew what we needed and how to spend that for our community's good. One of the largest projects, in short, was the Homeless Services Center that's now under construction.
Mhm.
So that's meant to be not just a place to crash at night, but the services to help people get out of the cycle of homelessness.
That's great. I remember the ARPA when there were community discussions around where to put the money. That was actually powerful because at least I feel like people had a say about that money.
Yes.
They had to say what they think the money could help with, where the money should go, and it was great to see several workshops just around how do we want to do with the money. I don't know if all the cities in the US did that. I'm sure there are probably some cities that just went ahead and decided what they wanted to do. Maybe they had needs for that money that was just getting the money and let's put it there. But I think for a diverse community like Harrisonburg, that was a very great move to bring people. I think it was at different schools, and they would sit and talk and decide what they think the money should do, and then go over a survey and evaluation. Said this is what got the most interest, and let's do it. And so I applaud the city for that because I was like, I came to several of those. I was like, yeah, this is amazing. Like we never had to know what the money was doing in our countries. So this year, you know that your voice can be heard and you can share something about it. And that's a follow-up question for you. What really empowered you to run for an elected seat or to get involved in politics?
Well, gosh, if you had told me when I first arrived here in 2006 to work for Rosetta Stone that I would wind up being the vice mayor of this town, I would not have believed it. But the track that brought me here was in 2008 when Obama was first running for president. I was so inspired by that and went to the Harrisonburg Democratic Committee meetings and got my clipboard, my marching map, and went out knocking on doors for President Obama.
Oh.
And I remember it was especially moving in the Northeast neighborhood that's, mostly minority Black, especially I remember holding this little old Black lady's hand saying, yes, we can. And just it was so moving and inspiring. So to see that, yes, we can make that change, I was hooked. And over the years since then, I worked for several other candidates for various different levels of office. Jennifer Lewis, Brent Finnegan, Kai Degner, whoever was running for state or local or congressional offices. So that gave me an experience with what it takes to campaign. So in the 2020 election, I was leading the Elizabeth Warren local campaign. And so I was out there knocking doors before anybody else was. 2020 was the pandemic, remember? And so people saw that and said, hey, you ought to run for office. And at first I said, oh, I don't have time for that. I was teaching at JMU. I was working at Rosetta Stone. I can't do that. A few days later, I was laid off from my part-time job at Rosetta Stone. I said, maybe I do have time for this.
More time.
One door closes, another opens. And it just sort of opened me to that possibility. And it was about this time in March 4 years ago. And I was down to the wire for the timing. So I had to get the forms together to say I could do this. And I was off and running. So it was the politics that led me into it. Now, I want to make the distinction between politics and governing, because that was the real change I had to make once I was in elected office and I'm sitting up here writing or passing laws and responding to the community. Still, the politics have to do with we are accountable to the community. They elect us or not, depending on what they want to see happen in the city, and that's their prerogative. So we respond to that by governing according to what the community wants.
Yeah, and that's great because it's that distinction. That politics is probably just sharing what you think you're gonna do. But when you're governing, you have your people's lives and future in your hands. You make decisions that could really make big difference in people's lives.
Oh, absolutely.
And so,
And the weight of it is astounding. I mean, I say sometimes this is the hardest thing I've ever done. I graduated from Harvard in Russian, and this is still the hardest thing I've ever done. Not hard in the sense of a constant grind, but the weight and the stakes are enormous because you're affecting people's lives when you make a decision. And the effect is much more direct in local government. It's sort of a step or two removed when you get to state and national government.
Yeah. My colleague at church also used to say, state government, the local government is where most of our lives, day-to-day activities are decided upon.
Right.
Because when you get to the state and federal, it's high level things. But when you're here, the transportation, homeless shelters, anything, they're done at the local level, childcare, things like that.
Right.
So this is the most important part of governance that we have at the city level. And you've been involved in civic engagement for a while, beyond being a vice mayor. You've also you've mentioned the Democratic Committee and the Planning Commission that you're part of, but also those share or showcase your dedication to serving the community, and we've seen that in your work, in yourself explaining what you wanted to do for the community to improve the community, and is there anything that you can say is a project or beside from the you just talked about the money, where the money went to build, was it the homelessness?
The homeless services center.
Homeless service center. Is there anything else that you've worked on recently or in the last 3 years that you think have been powerful?
Oh,
that
yes.
helped the community? Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, what a common thread for me is the passion to make a difference. And that was my internal reason for running.
Yeah.
And where I have made the most difference already is in bringing the climate change discussion front and center.
Yeah.
And we've passed a couple of key pieces of legislation, I'll call it, resolutions and community goals. A solar resolution to make our municipal buildings more efficient and more including renewable energy. Now, it was already a state law, but we made it in effect sooner and more stringent than the state law. Now, I also called on staff to put the buildings and energy focus area in our environmental committee next after we did the transportation, because those are the two places where you can get the most reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change. So we've just reached the point where we have a model to start to calculate where can we get the most bang for our buck, the cost-effective renovations that we can do for efficiency or adding renewable energy, solar panels, and perhaps other forms in our municipal buildings, because that's all we can directly control.
Yeah.
And where I think that I'm kind of amused to think where I've really made some of the most important impacts is in the private sector. The developers who want to build a project know to present to planning commission and then to city council that they are going to do the solar and they are going to do the electric vehicle chargers. They have to do that to get my vote.
Which is good. And I think our city is at least involved in trying to make sure that we reduce our, carbon dioxide emission, things like that.
Right, exactly. And that EPSAC is the acronym, Environmental Protection Standards Advisory Committee. Anyway, the EPSAC committee recommended to council, which then we then adopted, the community goals, that the summation is we want to be carbon neutral by 2050. Now,
that's great.
That that is an ambitious goal.
It is.
Then it becomes, how do we get there from here?
Yeah.
What can we do both as city government and as a community?
Yeah.
And I insisted on adding those community goals. This is not just about city buildings and vehicles. This is about bringing in the whole community to participate in this sort of moonshot level effort. And one effort we've made is to join the Virginia CPACE, which is a complicated acronym, Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy. It's a financing mechanism to help private industry establish efficiency goals and efficiency renovations and add renewable energy. So all the more reason to get the big buildings with flat roofs to get solar panels on top and help with the investment that entails. So the really enlightening thing to me was that initiative came from economic development, which says that climate action makes business sense. And it was such a revelation that our community now realizes that. And Harrisonburg has been leading in renewable energy, solar adoption, mostly from a few dedicated early adopters in the residential area. So now that the commercial and industrial sectors are joining too. We also have our own municipal electric utility in Harrisonburg Electric Commission.
Yeah.
And I've been working with Brian Odell, the head of that, along with EPSAC. We've just approved putting solar panels on the farmers market, the Turner Pavilion.
Oh, that's good.
Which would be a beautiful, iconic. Now they have to do engineering assessments to make sure it's feasible, but we'll just be feeding electricity into the grid, make it greener.
And that's a way to go. Climate change is a real threat to our planet.
And that's why I've been bringing it forward, because at the local city government level, people are mostly concerned about the trash and the roads and the sidewalks, and climate change doesn't touch their lives directly until it does. And by then it's too late.
Yeah.
Or not too late to change what we can, but by the time there are wildfires on the mountains, it's already advanced to the point where we need to be acting yesterday. So let's act today.
Yeah, and I'm a co-founder of BioEarth, which we've been. It's basically aiming to really live sustainably and build peace that is ecological, material, physical, spiritual, and so the idea is to reduce our carbon emission as much as we can, our carbon footprint. And by that, also thinking about alternative living solutions, beyond our, regular living situation. How do we reduce that by creating, more community, communal livings and stuff like that, more bike lanes, more bike racks so that people get bike instead of just having to drive every half a mile to go to grocery. But that is a vision that I know there are many zoning issues when it comes to projects like that. And that's where the city comes in, try to understand if a project makes sense in terms of climate change. How can we really ease the zoning restrictions so that people could build a community that is going to reduce the emission as much as possible? And I know you're a fan of climate change as well as other city council members. I think Harrisonburg needs to also lead on that.
Exactly.
Because we've led on many things.
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a very pertinent timing for that, because on planning commission and in the zoning, we've just relaunched the zoning ordinance rewrite. And one of the key features of that is making a more dense, walkable, bikeable, lower emissions, sustainable city, to counteract the prominence of the car over the decades that, a century by now of America's whole infrastructure. We want to improve the transit and the walkable areas of town so that it's more livable and more sustainable.
Yeah. And there's someone really deeply connected to the community. What message do you have for the residents of Harrisonburg, in terms of the importance of civic engagement, engaging the city council, engaging with different services. We have the Citizen Academy here, which is one way of learning about what it's there. But how important do you think civic engagement is?
Oh, it's crucial. Show up, come to city council meetings, speak up, contact us. When we had this packed room of supporters of the ceasefire resolution, I said, this is what democracy looks like.
Yeah.
And we appreciated their coming and we're saying, please show up for more and join our boards and commissions. Now, I wanted to mention a key example of prominent members of the immigrant community joining those commissions. We have a couple, Heja Al-Sendi and Farah Barzanji, who have joined respectively the Planning Commission and the Environmental Committee because they were top-level experts in their fields, their homeland, the Kurdish community in Iraq.
Yeah.
So that's a great example of people bringing their skills from their home countries and applying them in their new community here. So whether it's just showing up, going to Citizens Academy is a great example of how our city staff leads interested citizens through the process of learning how our city works. You go visit the public works and see the parade of trucks. That's one of the most fun things.
Yeah. I've been part of the Citizen Academy, I think probably 2020 or 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun to just learn and understand how.
Oh, I was in there with you.
Yeah, we were in the same program. Yeah.
and
That's right.
I was trying to be incognito. Don't mind me. Oh, they were like, I remember Brian Mancini, the director of Parks and Rec, saying, Mrs. Dent wants the solar panels on the scoreboard.
And I know Farah was part of that, and Farah's been very actively. But I think the other challenge that is happening is that people with a lot of great skills, when they get to the US, they don't find the pathway to use their skills. Mm-hmm. And Farah is one example.
Yeah, exactly.
She has been a chemistry professor with a lot of biochemistry experience. Now she's not doing that because of probably credentialing and licensure, but she's been, or language maybe would be one of the biggest challenge, first of all, when you get here. But we've been doing a lot of efforts at the state level, and I think even at the local level, it's still going to be crucial. Things like language accessibility, things like credentialing, but those could be a state level issue. We just passed a resolution for international medical graduates to be able to practice in the state of Virginia. And that passed both the House and Senate, and is going to the governor to sign. And so those are just some examples. But even at the local level, there are things that could help people, like coaching, helping them financial literacy, things like that could help the immigrant, the refugee community that are coming here to be able to understand their skills and how they can transfer those skills in something that could be really beneficial to them, and they can stay in their field of expertise, but also contribute to our community. And I think if we don't tap into that skill, we are just wasting of, knowledge and skills. And so I think the biggest issue here would be around language accessibility, at least at the city level. People have information in their language. We talked with Mary about that. Like language accessibility as being the first step to integration, is being able to communicate. And so language plays a key role. And I know that the city is trying to lead on some of that. At least to try to make information more accessible and have maybe interpreters or something like that. Could you say something about that? Anything?
Well, sure. I have seen in Planning Commission in particular, when someone who speaks a different language, at least we do this for Spanish. I'm not sure how many languages we cover. When someone whose native language is Spanish wants to present that they want to do, say, a childcare service in their home, there's an interpreter with the headset on who's interpreting what the council is saying to the applicant and vice versa. And when they come and stand at the podium, the translator is there to help them. So that's a case of real-time, in-person language access. Do we have that in Kurdish, Arabic? I'm not sure. I haven't seen that yet. I know that we have translation services into I'm not sure how many languages, at least those: Arabic, Kurdish, Spanish, maybe Russian. Depending on what documents we're releasing, we might target certain languages. Well, since we have something like 70 languages spoken in the schools,
Yeah, it's cool.
how do we cover
7
that?
plus.
And again, from my work at Rosetta Stone, I know that whole translation localization process is time-consuming, expensive, difficult to get right, especially when you have to have nuances about how to encourage someone without,
Yeah.
being condescending, we'll say.
Yeah.
So yes, it's certainly an issue. We also appreciate organizations like Skyline Literacy that are helping people gain those language skills and gain the English so that they can function more readily in the society as it is. At the same time, trying to meet them where they are with the language skills.
Yeah, and I think the last thing, because so you went to Harvard, you've been in tech, you've written technical, information and manuals and been involved in technology. The biggest challenge that the young people, have or a challenge that they have to face every day is finding the right coaching into knowing, or assessing what they really want to do and finding someone to empower them to be what they want to do. Now, that is even bigger when it comes to people that have moved here. 55,000 people in Harrisonburg. 12% of those people are foreign-born residents. So it's a huge number of people that were either born outside of the United States or they have a different nationality or origin before they move to the state. Now, what is the place of the young people in your daily work as a city council member, vice mayor of Harrisonburg? And how do you think we can better assist the young people to really find their passion, but also find that support that they need so that they can be out of, distraction, drug, or other things, and focus energy on things that could make a huge difference to them?
Well, gosh, education and civic involvement, as we've been talking about. If I wanted to touch a little bit on my technical background, one of the first ways I got involved in city government, so to speak, was when I was first laid off from Rosetta Stone in 2012. I went to then the mayor, Kai Degner, and said, "You've got people who are suddenly on the street who want to stay here. What can we do?" And he called a great meeting of city leaders and the Rosetta Stone alums, we called ourselves. And we went around the room and introduced ourselves as the Rosetta Stone alums and the city leaders and made connections that are still active to this day. So that was an example of the city stepping in to help people who had been displaced even within the city find other ways to stay here rather than have to move to DC for a job. That's when I went freelance because I wanted to stay here. So similar services that we could provide, say, I'm just sort of thinking aloud here, for graduating seniors. What are the opportunities for you here so you don't have to move away for a job?
Yeah.
And to that end, some of the startup communities, I first met Brian Scholl of Economic Development, for instance, when I had come out of that Rosetta Stone and freelance transition and joined what was then called the Shenandoah Valley Innovation Coalition. That's since kind of absorbed into Shenandoah Valley Technical Coalition, whatever. So, and the point of that was to make an economic technical hub, an entrepreneurial ecosystem, we called it.
Yeah.
So if there's a support and funding and community of startup businesses, that can give people a path to directly create their own business and live and work here.
Yeah.
Where in the larger scheme of things, it's a lot more affordable to live and work in Harrisonburg than in DC, say.
Yeah, that's right.
And JMU has some great innovation and entrepreneurial programs. I remember hearing of a couple of guys from JMU who started a business with the ideal pour for every beer that had the technology down. So just coming up with ideas and creating your own path can be really a viable strategy for people who want to live and work and stay here.
Yeah, because most people, if they don't have remote jobs, most people try to find remote jobs so they can stay in the community. Like I need a remote job so I can stay right here because I love it. It's good for my family, my kids. But if you don't have that option, you might end up going instead of trying to do something here because you don't have that option. So I think it's good to continue to invest in our community. I think that's what we've seen happening. And so there's more to come. And I think it's also a great encouragement to see that there's a lot of things that you guys are doing on the city level. Now it's about the community also standing with young people to help them also grow and build passion around things that they could innovate or create or imagine in our community here to make this a better place. And we on Road Talk, we are really committed to doing a lot of coaching. And I've been discussing with our team and the people that we talked to. So we just need resources. We'll be able to build spaces where we can talk to young people, have conversations like this. What do you need? What are the things that you think can help you achieve your potential? Because you have a lot of potential. Coaching them, empowering them to do what they can do. And that will benefit our community. That will benefit everybody in general. And so thanks for joining Road Talk. If you have anything that you can say about Road Talk, what can you say?
I think it's marvelous that you're doing this. And actually, when you were talking about finding pathways for our immigrant community, the people on the camera can't see the people behind the cameras here, but clearly an international community of people who are coming together to do this very high-tech program that must have taken a lot of coaching and the fundraising for the equipment. I mean, this is a very impressive outfit you've got going right here to make this podcast. So I commend you for that.
Thank you so much. Thanks for watching Road Talk. We've been with Vice-Mayor Laura Dent. We've explored the wide areas of issues, but also her background, her civic engagement journey, and so many things that involve the Harrisonburg community and her work in the city council. So thanks for watching again. And please do not forget to subscribe, like, make a comment, and share. And if you want us to bring someone in the studio, please let us know in the comment and we'll make sure that we reach out to the person and they'll come on our studio. Thanks for giving us your precious time and being a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Rodriguez. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.